Welcome to the new inaugural season or inaugural episode of a new season of the RPG Breakfast Chat. So, who won the roll off? I'm happy to defer to the end.
Think that was me. If everyone's rolled, I'm not quite sure how many people are coming.
Well, let's see. Pex was supposed to come, but he might be running late. So I think everyone's here that I'm aware of. If you if you're here and I'm not aware of you, then let me know. But yeah, go ahead.
All right. So hi everyone, and I get to be the first person to introduce myself in the new episode of the next season. Win. My name's Ed. Ed Jowett. I work for Shades of Vengeance. I'm the lead game designer and art director, and well, pretty much whatever else comes up. To date, I've created 10 game lines. My 10th is currently on Kickstarter. Woo! And I did bring a topic with me today, and no one actually asked me what it was. But I thought talking about how you maintain your work-life balance while attempting to create as well might be an interesting thing. Over to Tom.
Me. Yep, I'm Tom Canales. I am one of the RPG designers for Frog God Games. Worked on a lot of projects there. I worked on the Lost Lands campaign setting, Rappanathic, Carlos Vistas line, and I'm currently working on my own project that I'm heading up with a couple other people writing underneath me. So that's what's currently going on with me.
Well, I guess I'm next.
Go for it.
Sure. My name's Brian. Together with my wife, we form Lost Relic Industries. We are currently working on a Swords and Shaman tabletop RPG that we're hoping to have ready for production early 2020.
Sweet. And I'm Todd. I create stuff and I talk about stuff on YouTube as Hex Press, and I host the RPG Breakfast Chat here at the tavern. So let's see. Who was it who won? You want to throw your topic out there and let's get this show on the road.
All right. Yeah, no worries. Let me see if I can find the exact wording I wrote down. 1 second. Here we go. The topic is how do you maintain a work-life creator balance? With a bad capital B in there. That should be a lowercase b.
It's all good. So what are your thoughts on it? I'll have to think about that one. That's a pretty tough question.
Both. I don't think Ripples. That's a really good question. Is this for DMs or game designers? I don't think that DMs are isolated from the need to create, so I don't think that either should be excluded. I also think that a lot of DMs or GMs, which is the term I tend to use, so if I use that, then forgive me. I think a lot of them have a desire to create something and maybe can't find the time. So I think the answer is both. My response to that is actually I don't do a very good job of it. One of those gets rather squished by my attempts at doing the other two, and that is very much the life bit. I work and then I come home and I create. And between the two, I tend to sort of put in about 40 to 60 hours a week on creating games and about 40 hours a week at my day job. So, yeah, the answer is I don't do a great job. There aren't that many hours left in the week at that point. So I was interested in what other people do and how they balance these things, which are, I don't know, I imagine that most people have some level of similarity to me, in that the creation can become all-consuming.
Yeah, I'd say even for players, it can be something that just in general kind of a work-life game balance, because RPGs, you can get so wrapped up in them that you can end up spending an inordinate amount of time, even if it's just kind of mind share, as not even physically doing something, but have it kind of dominating your brain. You can spend a ton of time. I think to the extent that I'm able to do any balance, and I'm sort of like you, it comes and goes. And some weeks I'm more wrapped up in two of those three than in others. But I try to schedule things somewhat. So I have a couple of nights that are kind of put aside as these are my sort of game nights, even if I'm not playing, that I can kind of have that kind of space to work on stuff, which also means that I have to put it away on other nights or days where it's kind of not on my schedule, or it's kind of set aside for family.
Yeah, that's actually a great one from Ripples. I do a very similar thing. While I commute, I actually spend a lot of that time sort of getting myself in order for the stuff I need to deal with. And I think a lot of people forget that sort of commute time is potentially thinking time, because whether you drive or you commute in another way, I'm based in England, just in case anyone can't tell from my accent. And I get the underground to work. So I'm stuck on a train underground with no internet for a good chunk of the time, and I try to use the time to sort of build my either my schedule or even do some actual work.
Yeah, totally. The Notes app on my phone has been great for being on the subway, and I'm in New York, so I take the subway a lot. So being on there and being able to jot down stuff and think about stuff as it comes to me. Sorry if I interrupted someone. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I think for all pretty much game designers, it's going to be a very similar pattern in that pretty much all of them have day jobs outside of being an RPG designer. It simply doesn't pay enough to make that your full-time career. So, you find yourself squeezing in time whenever you can. I try, and the best I can do, I could say most weekends, I'll spend at least 16 to 20 hours working on creating stuff. And I tend not to do it much during the week at night. I'm not a great night person. I come home and I end up having to go to the gym or cook dinner or do something. And by the time I'm done, it's 8, 9 o'clock and I don't really feel like doing it. And so I try and squeeze it in on the weekends when I can, but it's also about maximizing that free time that you do have. Like,
yeah, I definitely hear you on that one. I'm not much of a night person either, but yeah, it's about using the time that you do have and figuring out that it's free time, I think.
I'm still struggling with all of this, so I don't know that I have any answers. But you guys hit on some things, and I feel like having a routine and a schedule, having a plan for the day. I One of the things that I like to do is I feel like I need to work out every day, and so I'll get up early. So I'll get up at, well, I mean, maybe not super early compared to some folks, but I'll get up a couple of hours before work so that I can do my workout and then have a good breakfast. And then I'm ready to go hit work. And I feel like I've already accomplished something. And since I wasn't really taking that time away from anything else, it was just sort of that was time I gave to myself. The rest of it is tricky. I mean, sometimes you've just got to drop the ball somewhere to pick up for something that's more important, and so you have to, like, I guess, remember how to prioritize those things, right? I mean, family and people that you want to be with are they have to be at the top of the list, and that's where you want them. But then after that, it's like there's the work that we do that's our passion, but then there's also work that's important, where where we go to make money, and that is significant. So I like I said, I don't have any answers. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm hoping, if we get our game system sort of perfected. I don't know if perfected is really the right word, because I don't think there's a perfect system out there. But my hope is that the rest of the design and creation after the initial launch of a game is a little bit easier. But I don't know. I guess we'll see when we cross that bridge.
I think I can tell you that as a general rule, it's not.
Great.
Sorry, don't see publishing the game as an end. It's really just the beginning, even for just that game.
Well, I don't know about it as an end, but I think that there's so much that has to be right in the game system that takes a lot of iteration. To me, let's say you have the system for designing something down. So you once you've nailed all that down, once you've nailed down these are the mechanics of everything, and you've said this is how it's going to be at least until we decide that it's not, and we have another major revision, which may or
Mm.
may not happen. Then the supplemental data, the extra stuff, right? If you say, well, hey, we're publishing another list of creatures or an adventure, but they're all based around this rule set. I think that's I don't know. I'm thinking that there you don't need to iterate on that as much, but I could be wrong. Um,
I think what you'll find is that there are other things that end up needing iterating on. So I did all of the work. I spent 2 years doing my first book, and within 6 months I had to publish another version of the book. Not massively different, but and no rules changes or anything, but enough had gone wrong that I hadn't noticed. Because you get a level of can't see the wood for the trees, no matter how long you spend away from it, no matter how many other people see it, they don't look at it with the context that you do.
sure.
And you only find that out after the thing's gone out. Unfortunately, it's unfortunately the way of things in my experience.
Hard to get past the blind spots in your own work.
Oh yeah,
Hence why editors and people like that, are necessary, because you just, as you said, the more you look at it, even if you put it away, I feel like stuff just gets so embedded in your brain that you just can't see past it, and plus it's hard to read things like you don't know what you're supposed to be, what the meaning is, and you don't know what you're trying to say.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's tough.
That
I am
that
hopeful.
rule. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, it made me think of, there's that rule or something that that all your playtesters know, that everybody knows, that somehow didn't get written down.
Mhm.
Right. One thing I was hopeful for, just as far as not necessarily on content creating balance, but on DM GM, balance, is that as online tools keep getting better and better, they can really automate a lot of the stuff that could take tons of time. Like already, if you need a dungeon, instead of having to sit there and spend hours drawing one out, you can go somewhere, hit a button, and presto changeo, you've got a dungeon. You could generate all kinds of stuff using tools, and I feel like the tools are just going to get better and better, integrating different rule sets or being able to put your customized rules in. And so hopefully that stuff will continue to keep taking the edge off of if you're a GM that feels like you need to prep for a long time or prep tons of detail, that there's going to be stuff to help take care of it for you, so you can just stick on the creative stuff and hopefully not have it absorb too much out of your days, but you can get more done in a less period of time.
I definitely hope you're right. I'm not sure you're right, but because I think that what happens is as you increase your ease with which you get things, people start to increase their criteria for you as a GM.
Oh, that's certainly a possibility. I try to go the low prep route, so it's not something I've had to battle with myself. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, so it's totally a possibility. I mean, as someone,
Yeah, no, that's just been my experience. People look at you and go, "Wait, hang on, how long did this take you? Like 10 minutes?"
that's where I lie and say, no, it took me all day.
Yeah.
Well,
The problem is being convincing when doing it, I suppose.
yeah, but sometimes that thing that you come up with in 10 minutes is awesome.
Yeah.
And
No,
I
no,
mean,
no, don't get me wrong, but people go, "Okay, so
yeah,
what are you going to do with the rest of your time? Are you going to
yeah.
set up this thing or that thing or whatever?"
Well, eh, the thing is they're not always even going to be interested in the thing that you spent 2 or 3 hours on. So
Nope, that's also
it's a,
true.
it's a tricky balancing act. For a long time, I was using a website to sort of catalog world setting stuff, and excuse me, set up a wiki page where I could just take notes from session to session. Um, and that was some work, but it wasn't too hard because it was like as I was doing this stuff, it gave me a place to point the player characters to, or the players to, as reference, and it gave me a point where I could go back and sort of look, because suddenly I had this giant Wikipedia of all these things in Songyard, and I was like, oh, okay, that, for consistency, and that kind of helped me, in terms of, so you talk about all these great online tools and stuff, and that was one way, that just sort of helped me, because it helped me categorize things and see them in a digital format that it was easy for me to drill down into, or drill back out of in that sort of wiki format.
Yeah, though I could see that. Like I've definitely gone down rabbit holes where I put in a couple wiki entries, and that means, oh wait, maybe I should put in these wiki entries, and oh, now I should put in those wiki entries. I end up spending a long time doing wiki entries. Though I found the benefit at the end of it was that I had all this stuff done, and I didn't need to do it again. Like the next time somebody had a question about it, I could be like, go to the wiki.
Yep.
So
Here's the
I
house
felt like,
rules right
yeah,
here.
here are the house rules right here. So yeah, it took me X amount of hours, and I went down maybe too far into little edge cases to put in the wiki. But once I had them all in there, they're done. So I did appreciate that part of the wiki format. But I could totally see how, if you're particularly kind of detail driven, that these tools just allow you to drill down and drill down and drill down, and so you end up even maybe getting 3 times the work done that you in time you used to, but you're spending that same amount of time.
I think this would be around the normal point where PEX would be going, hey, move on to the next topic. Hey, there are 4 of you and we've got an hour.
Totally. All right, so let's go. Let's move on in. That's right. So who's got the next one to go?
I think I was second in line. So that was magic items in your campaigns. How much is too much and how much is too little? And where do you get that balance? So I have people from 2 schools of thoughts. I have some people in my group who want basically a wagon full of magic items following behind them that they can constantly tap into. And then you have others who like that more gritty, sword and sorcery, 1 or 2 items that the character may have. And they prefer more of a low magic environment. So how do you balance between, and I know one of the other topics is also balance. How do you balance how much is too much and how much is too little, at the point where the player is either very frustrated that they're not properly getting rewarded for their efforts, or the player is just so greedy that they can never have enough things to make them super powerful. So
that's a really interesting question. Oh, sorry, Todd.
No, go for
it. So that's quite an interesting question, because I think that it probably varies depending on which game you're playing. Now, this obviously is coming through my lens of I almost never play anything that I didn't create. It's quite rare for me to have the time to, shockingly. But I think that it varies. For me, so there are some games where I literally just go, yeah, you know what, go nuts. You have within reason, an unlimited amount of money or whatever, and you can just go out and as you say, get a wagon of stuff that you're pulling behind you. When you're looking for something that's a bit more sort of hard to, so that they're not so plentiful, you also have the challenge of how do you make sure that everyone in the party doesn't feel like they're just, that these 2 people have one and you've got a party of 3. Well, okay, now I kind of feel like I'm not equal with the rest of the party. That's not exactly fair, is it? So finding that balance is an interesting thing, and I think that it depends a lot on the group as well as the game.
Yeah, some games are just inherently looking for additional magic. Like, for instance, Call of Cthulhu generally is a fairly low magic game that I've played. I mean, I haven't seen too many characters running around with tons of spells or tons of items. They may have 1 or 2 things, but they're not going to be loaded down with a ton of powerful things. A game like Pathfinder, they're going to be much more likely to have a lot of things. And also, because of the rules, allow you to create magical items, and it's not that difficult or expensive, that it can lend to the characters having a lot more items to draw upon, which, if you run the game as written, can be very difficult to maintain that balance, because they could just mow through a lot of things a lot easier than they would if they were at a level that was what the game designers thought it would be. So you end up having to fudge things on the GM side to make the combats more challenging and more difficult, simply because the characters are generally more powerful than they were intended to be for the monsters the way they were written, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you not think that represents a flaw in the game design?
I think that 5e deliberately didn't include magic item creation in the DMG for that reason, because they felt that was an issue.
I think you're probably right. And I think that, you know, I think that probably things have potentially changed in the audiences that play Pathfinder, and I've not actually looked closely enough at Pathfinder 2 to be aware. Have they done anything in the new version to rectify this issue?
I don't know. I'm not too familiar with Pathfinder 2. I took just quick looks at it, and I was kind of like,
Likewise.
it's okay. I'm not blown away. I think at its heart, it's still probably very similar to Pathfinder 1 in that regard, because that was one of the things that made it popular.
Now, I know that I don't know if it carried over into Pathfinder proper. I remember in 3.x, I'm pretty sure that the game was balanced around the party having some number of magical items at different levels. So I think they actually tried to build in the fact that if you were level whatever, you were expected to have some level of magic items. And I think in the 3 point whatever, probably, I don't know if a player's handbook or DMG, you could look up and see what those numbers are.
Yeah, they had it. It was like a gold piece value. Like if you started a character at 6th level, the character should have X number of gold pieces of items on them, or something like that. I remember distinctly. It might have been in Pathfinder 2 as well. Not Pathfinder 2,
Pathfinder as well.
Yes.
Yeah, though obviously, like they and I don't really like, just as an aside, I'm not a big fan of player characters creating magical items. I feel like those are things left for NPCs who spent their whole lives making stuff. But I think the problem is that, as with everything, over time you start developing more powerful magic items. So how does that, gold piece per player thing hold up after a few years, when it's not just what's in the core books, but all the splats and third-party stuff?
Yeah. I mean, you end up in this situation where the players are powerful enough to, I don't know, fight dragons. Of course, they're going to tear through pretty much everything else, right? I mean, you'd expect them to, wouldn't you? I'm not saying it doesn't present any problem at all for the GM, because I agree it absolutely does, but there's sort of a degree of, okay, well, if we're going to be powerful enough to do the powerful things, we kind of have to be so powerful that the trivial things are just so simple. It's almost not worth doing.
Yeah, you have to kind of roll with the challenges, right? So once your party gets flying carpets, then a lot of hex crawling becomes somewhat moot, since they're getting places fast and they're not traveling over the terrain. So you just have to kind of adjust your game to fit
Gargoyle
the power
attack.
level that you have. Or that.
I think there's a number of issues that this addresses, or maybe not addresses, but that are sort of fall under this umbrella. Because one, if we're talking about magic in the game, there's the game world, right, and what the setting is like. And I, for one, I'm not a fan of. I know some people are, but I'm not a fan of a game world where magic is so commonplace that it's basically mundane. That it's, there's corner shops everywhere selling, scrolls of resurrection and stuff. I feel like that takes a lot out of the, it just feels like, wow, okay, so the game is going to be really easy, right? Um, and it takes some of the wonder out of it. Now, I think if you are interested in that, you're that kind of a game, you've got to play that to the hilt. You've got to go full Harry Potter if you're going to do that. I don't think, because otherwise, if people start to think about it, they're going to say, well, how does this even make sense? And so you've got to go full on and just sort of enjoy that immersion. The other side of it is that we're talking about player character scaling versus the encounters. And there's a couple of things there. Is one is you've got magic items that typically are meant to give you bonuses to enhance the natural abilities or skills that are on their character sheets. And these are basically nothing but basically scale modifiers, right? Your +5 sword or whatever. And so these are simply things that shift the scale. And to me, those should be sort of a matter of the GM's preference to say, okay, well, in fact, all of this should be kind of a matter of the GM's and the player's preference. But they can say, okay, well, if I'm going to allow access to these things, then does this system allow me a mechanic that makes it easier to scale up the encounter so that it is also more challenging? Um, and that's one of the things that I think is kind of important. It's one
Yeah, I
thing
mean,
to say,
and
yeah,
that was kind of what I was trying to say earlier when I said, look, isn't this, perhaps a failure in the game design in the first place?
mhm,
Because if you fail to provide that means in order to make the sort of the encounters more challenging, or fail to provide an alternative, then what are you supposed to do?
right.
As the GM, you're supposed to figure it out. To me, that's a failure in game design when you reach that point.
Well, for me, I agree at a certain level, but I also feel like what one of the things that we did was we looked at it and we said, well, I need the ability to make it easy for the GM to go in and maybe 15 minutes, change or adjust the challenge level of a creature,
Sure.
so that it's not hard to do, that it's easy. You've got a template here and you can look at it and say, okay, well, this guy, he needs to be, level 5. Or, hey, what if we decided to make him gigantic? What does that look like? Well, here's a template. In 5 minutes, you've got a new version. And we did that because of that, because we knew that when you had more players in the party, and they brought more magic to the table, suddenly that challenge just wasn't there for them. And so that was one of the things we tried to adjust for, because every group, every table is going to be different. Um, the other thing, which is I still struggle with, but it's really fun for me, is the utilitarian magic, right? That's your magic carpet. That's your other things that allow you to basically break the laws of physics, of the known world, right? And those are the things that are very difficult to balance. And I almost at a certain point I almost kind of give up, and it's I hate to say that, but it's almost up to the GM to be very sparing about allowing them. But on the flip side, they can provide for a lot of fun if you have player characters whose answer to problems isn't always, magic missile. I throw a fireball, I throw lightning at it.
Yeah, I think one thing that certainly from a what kind of guidance a system gives to GMs is to help with those issues. You don't really ever see in a magic item book that, hey, here's this cool item, but here on a meta level, beware these particular things, and here are some ideas of how to limit it. Like if you're going to give a magic carpet, maybe make it okay, one use per day, or it has some kind of has a couple charges, but then you got to recharge it in an interesting way so that, it's not just uh, reused over and over again, that maybe it has some kind of cost that you can play into in your adventures, or be aware that if you give this item out, certain challenges are going to be much easier for the party, or certain limitations are going to be gone, something like that. Because usually just say a bunch of items and it's really left to your experience, or whether you look online for people who've already used them to tell you how this could possibly go wrong in your game.
Yeah, that's almost something that really only comes from experience. It's really hard to write that in a manual and say, well, this is how you handle X, Y, and Z. It really just comes from knowing and looking at something and saying, what are the problems with this? I could see it here. It's kind of like when you're designing something. And my rule of thumb is, if I design something and it's like every character needs this, I know it's broken. I know I screwed up, because it's if everyone wants it, it's too good. And if nobody wants it, it's too bad. And that's kind of like the rule of thumb I try to use. But it's hard to put that in a manual and say, looking at something, whether or not it is too powerful or it's not powerful enough.
Yeah, I feel like there could become some kind of sidebar where if you've play tested your stuff, you have some ideas of what might give something trouble. But you might say, here's what we found, why we like it, but here's also some things why you don't like it. It's just an idea. I just know it's something that you never see, but obviously the people who've been play testing and creating it have some idea. I'm sure the people who first put magic carpets in their games and testing it for whatever compendium had some idea of this is what's going to happen when you throw this in your game, willy-nilly. So beware. But yeah, it's true. A lot of it does come from experience.
It sounds like we've maybe talked that one out.
Yep, I was about to say. All right, so who's next on the hit parade?
Oh man, are y'all already to me?
I think so. I have a couple of topics in my back pocket we can go through if we're running through too quickly, but yeah, go for it. What you
No,
got?
we're not. Like by the clock.
Oh,
15
okay.
minutes each.
All right, good.
Cool. Well, yeah, mine was basically off-roading the campaign, how to avoid, being tied to the rails.
I like it. So what are your thoughts since your topic?
Oh gosh. Well, so I think it's always one of the trickiest things in the game, to figure out, okay, I've got this hook that's going to get my player characters involved, and then their characters decide, well, they don't want to do this. And so the natural reaction or natural response of most GMs or DMs is, oh, I just spent hours working on that, and they don't want to do this, and the natural response is to become frustrated. And I'm basically that's one of those things that I've learned to try to work myself out of, to try to avoid that frustration and try to embrace the fact that the player characters have just said, they've just told me something else that they'd rather do. And this can be particularly tricky before a session 0, which is usually when everyone gets together to talk about the type of game that they're going to play. And so, um, but during that first session, I think it can be very important to discuss those things. To say, hey, this is the game setting, this is the world. Tell me a little bit about what kind of characters you want to make, to try to get that you know sort of jumpstart that to understand. You might even give them some background on the world. You might say, okay, this is where we plan to run the first adventure. But after that, we can move on. So is sort of some examples that I had in my own experience, where, in starting, um, I had an adventure where I was attempting to get a map into the hands of the player characters, and to see if they would buy it and want to go treasure hunting for this map. So they were actually in a town. Towns are great because it's chaotic. There's lots of things you can create NPCs on the fly. It's very scary for new DMs, but they were in a town, and what was interesting to me was they didn't want to talk to the merchant that actually had a magical enchanted map for sale. So I asked them, well, what did they want to do? Well, they wanted to go down and check out there were some arena fights. They wanted to go and investigate some arena battles. So as they're going down there, they notice that there's lots of people placing bets on gladiators, and pretty soon the bard decides, well, I'm going to go around and start picking pockets. Aha! Well, here's an opportunity. Now I've let the players sort of off. They're going off and doing their own thing. But at this point, the bard makes a critical success, picking pocket, and manages to lift a magical enchanted map from one of the guests that was there.
So here's
so
a
that was one of
question, right?
Uh-huh.
On the back of that story, here's a question:
Mhm.
Is that not railroading?
It is a little bit, but this was
Right.
also a session 0.
Okay,
Um,
but I mean, I actually I'm with Ripples on this one. Broadly, I do not think that for the most part players mind being railroaded if it's a well-written adventure. So, they have to do something, and quite often if you give players no guidance at all, what I find they do is they wander around and really have no idea what to do, right? They'll just get lost and get bored and kind of give up on the game, because really they're just wandering around trying to figure something out, and there's no guidance whatsoever. And, we could go to this dungeon, okay, but do we want to? Is that really? Yeah, and I found that players quite often get to the point where they're kind of trying to second guess what the GM wants them to do, and that starts getting not fun for everybody quite quickly. I think there's railroading and there's railroading. There's, you have to buy this map, buy it right now. There's also, hey, I have this plan, I have this hurdle, this gate I want you to walk through, and I don't care what kind of circuitous route you take to get there. You can go to the marina fights and pick people's pockets to get this map, but one way or the other, you're going to get this map.
See, right? I would actually put the. Oh, sorry. I was gonna say I would actually rather put the map in sort of a Quantum Ogre situation, because they didn't go to the shopkeeper. So the fact that the shopkeeper had the map was not established in the world. To me, it would be more railroading if they go to the shop. The shopkeeper's like, "Hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I've got this magic map for you," and they say, "No way, man. We don't want it. No thanks." Then they go down the arena, pickpocket, and get a magic map. That to me is like, okay, they'll railroad it. This is more like, I feel like a quantum plot hook, where it's like, I have this plot hook.
Yeah.
They're going to get a hold of it, but I'm not determining whether they're going to take it or not. They could pickpocket
sort of a Schrodinger's plot hook. Yeah.
And they could throw it away.
There, or it might be there, or it might be there, it might be there. But eventually,
right. They're just going to get to, they're just going to, I'm just going to put them in a situation to get to see the hook. If they don't want it, they don't want it. I'm not going to force them down the path.
And I'll come up with a second hook and we'll do something else.
But I want them to at least see it. So I'm just going to put it where they're going to see it. So I put that in a little bit of a different thing, but I do agree with the railroading. I've totally done that myself, where I had a game. I thought I had established it in emails and communication, talking to my players, that this is going to be a sandbox. And I tried to really, but I didn't do a great job of it. And they went wandering around trying to figure out what I wanted. And because it was a sandbox, they just kind of started wandering. And I had a map, I had everything in front of them. So there was stuff wherever they went. And at the end of it, they thought like, hey man, you were just throwing encounters in front of us. And I was like, no, I literally had to send them. I literally sat down and said, here's the map. I was using Isle of Dread as my template. And I'm like, here's where you went. And here's all the stuff that was there that you guys experienced. If you'd gone other directions, you would have experienced other stuff. But they didn't see the sandboxness of it. So that was definitely a failure on my part to communicate it. And they were totally trying to figure out, well, what was my plan? I also feel like the railroading, it's totally true. I think where it becomes that negative that people are talking about is when you're undermining things that the players do or want
undermining
to do.
Player choice.
Yeah, or you're doing stuff.
Oh no, you have to have this map. You can't not have this map. You must have this map.
You're getting the map.
I don't care if you throw away. I don't care if you throw it away.
It's coming back.
It's going to reappear in your pocket.
Totally. Yeah.
Oh, what? Go away! I don't want the map.
Exactly. Like I had one spot where it was in college, and I was playing this guy's game, and he threw us through an Army of Darkness type portal into another world, and these guys jumped on us and started beating the heck out of us. And his plan, we could just start to see it, was his plan was that we were going to get beat down, and then his cavalry NPCs were going to come in and save us. The problem was that a couple of us actually started rolling well, and we started to actually turn the tide on our own. But instead of rolling with that, he literally had the guys start to retreat as his cavalry showed up. Then they turned around, ran back, and knocked us out, and then ran off again, so that we could end up in the situation that he had planned for us, which is we would wake up in prison and have to kind of beg and thank them for our survival. But of course, for us, it was total BS, because we thought we were on winning, and instead of getting that great victory, he took it away from us to further his plot points.
And and I don't agree with that. I think I brought, originally, I brought this to the table as I brought a real world example, because there are, to your point, we definitely do have rails. There's things that we want to try to do in the game. But at the same time, I feel like if my players say no to that, then I've missed something somehow in the hook, and I
You've
have to
probably got to
look.
come up with something else, right?
Yeah, and let's say if they're ready to if they say, okay, we've got this map, and they look at it and they say, well, we're not really that interested. Let's sell it. Okay, great. Now I've got a new adventure. And I try to embrace that because I feel like now they're telling me a story.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I think that's the fundamental thing for me when it comes to railroading. Storytelling is a two-way street in role-playing games. It's not the GM telling a story and then the players just have to like it or lump it. The whole point is that it is modified by the players' choices. It is modified by the dice rolls, and that means that the GM has to know the world and be adaptable based on what they choose to do, such as, for example, going off and trying to kill a crime boss because reasons.
Yeah, I think one of the things, getting back to kind of some of the original part about, how do you get away from being disappointed? I try to, I don't really know a good term for it. I think of it as if I think a lot of GMs tend to prep in sort of a lateral move. If they're going to start here, they're going to do this is going to happen, that's going to happen, they're going to get to this point, and then they kind of go down this path, which of course is very brittle in a sense, because any deviations are going to throw you off the loop if they don't take the actions that you think they're going to take, or it does this one event doesn't fit into the next one, so then you can't, it throws the next step out of whack. Whereas I try to think of, sort of planning radially, which is kind of what is around them,
Mhm.
and what is available to them, what do they have access to, and kind of starting the sort of bits of that, and then sort of expanding that circle outwards. I also think that one thing that I feel like I see this a lot on Reddit and places, and it seems like I think GMs don't necessarily communicate enough with the players outside the game to find out what next steps are.
Mhm.
Because I'll see a lot of posts of like, well, my players did this in last session and I don't know what they're going to do. And I always feel like, just have you tried emailing them and just asking them what they want to do? Because they're probably talking about it, or they've already decided. And instead of waiting for the next game, or feeling you have to prep a whole ton of stuff because you don't know which of the various options they're going to do, just ask them. Ask them, which one of these options are you guys going to do? I like to sometimes do that. Well, I'll leave them with that choice at the end of one session and then say, okay, tell me by, in a couple of days which one of those choices you're going to do, so I can prep it. And then I know what they're going to do because they've decided already.
I
I
think
like that. That's really good. I mean, asking them to do it. Now, again, you have to have players who are kind of cooperative and are all going to be working together, because you may always have that one person
Yeah, you're always
who
gonna have the
wants to
one
go
guy, right?
down, right, who wants to go down the rabbit hole, and the others, I don't really want to go. No, 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 I insist. We have to go. But yeah, that's a very good way of doing it. But the most important thing about the railroad is to make it not look like the railroad.
Yeah,
Make it
I mean,
not feel that way.
I agree with what Ripples is saying in the channel there. The way that I GM, and obviously I have a massive leg up because I created the worlds that I GM in for the most part, is to know the world and understand the world. And if you understand the world, it doesn't matter what they do, because you can have a pretty good idea pretty quickly of what it is going to result from that. I actually had a player who GMs quite frequently turn to me in the middle of a session during last year, and he just went, right, so we're going to this city, and if you want to go away and spend an hour prepping that, then it's cool. I'm like, no, 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 no. It's fine. I know exactly what's in this city. I know exactly what it's like, what the general flavor is, and I'll come up with something on the fly about what things are going on when you walk in the gates. Right? You don't you don't want to be in a situation where anything they can do can throw you.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I definitely think that's where that world building prep pays off, right? It's because, yeah, if you know your regions, if you know what they're doing, then there's nowhere they can go that's going to surprise you, because you've already got at least some idea in your brain.
I think, yeah, what a couple things that both of y'all were saying. One was I like the idea of having, you talked about the radial concept. Really, yeah, an adventure is just a set of encounter areas or places where action or something can take place. And understanding, instead of trying to guide people down those, understanding what they are and what the actors are doing and their motivations, allow you to be able to make changes on the fly rather than to try to say, oh, well, all my player characters have to be knocked out right now because otherwise it's not going to set them up for this next thing. So I think that's important. And then understanding the world so that you can bring them in and then, as you said, sort of improvise. Um, One of the mistakes I used to make early on was, uh, when we were uh, younger and we would play games in high school and stuff was we would play to the rules, and I think like to the hilt. It was like you'd follow the adventure in the book to the hilt, and of course, most of the games for first edition D&D and things like that back then were set in dungeons, right? So a lot of times you just started out at at the dungeon, so that wasn't that big a deal. But we would play all night to exhaustion, and an exhausted DM doesn't really make at least in my opinion, doesn't make good choices
Yeah.
and becomes easily frustrated. So, especially like, if I'm going to run a game, I'm going to put a lot of energy into it. I'm going to have a cup of coffee there. I'm not going to be hungover. You're going to have my best me, because I have to be there to listen and hear things. And instead of just shutting down and saying no, because I can't think of something. So you really have to be, at least for me, you really have to be at your best.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think there's a big part of just to come back to railroading. There's a big part of railroading and understanding the universe that comes down to one specific thing that I don't hear people say all that often, but I think is very true. And that is when you play D&D, when you play whatever game you play, right? You're not necessarily, and in fact almost never, playing exactly the lore that is in the books. You're playing your version of that world, right? So, if this thing is different for whatever reason, it may well have exactly the same normal tent poles that everything else does, but you're never going to have read enough and understood enough about that world. No disrespect meant to Ripples, who clearly does a lot of research, and you've got to respect that. You're never going to know absolutely everything, and sometimes you're going to have to make choices based on a lack of research. And during those times, you have to understand that this is your version of the world, and if it's not identical to what some novel comes out in 3 months' time saying, that's cool, that's fine, that's okay. That you're playing your game, not necessarily exactly what was already there, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the issues that comes up with games based on licensed content or known content is when you get the player who may know something more or differently about the setting than you do. Playing in Star Wars, and you've only watched the movies, somebody else has read the comics, and so there's this disconnect between what the world you've based it on, what this player knows, and then you come into conflict. One of the other things I wanted to mention was I think something that comes up is just as a GM, I think we often think our ideas are better than they are. So what I mean by that is often where you see people railroading towards a setup that they just think is brilliant. Oh, I'm gonna knock them up, and they're out, and they're gonna wake up in a cell, and they're gonna have to do all this stuff, and like it's amazing. And so they feel like it's so great that they just have to make that setup happen no matter what, which is usually when they start trotting all over player agency. But I think the thing is you have to look, kind of pull back from your own stuff and say it's probably not that great. It's throw it in a Google search and see how many other people have done this same thing. It's not the most original, amazing thing that we think it is. So if that setup doesn't happen, it's okay. It's okay if they don't get knocked out and they don't end up in the cell. Let me think about these other things that could happen. Because I think what happens is we get so stuck in our own brains about this amazing thing we have, we don't really think about what it's like to play through that idea. We're maybe looking at it like it's a movie or a TV show or some kind of climactic moment, and we think in this cinematic imagination that we have that it's this thing, and it's probably not going to end up that way at the table anyway. And then too, what is it like to have to play through that? Sometimes I've seen in Reddit where GMs have this great idea they'll throw out there, and the first response will be like, so if you were playing that, would you like to play through this particular scenario? And they think about it and they go, I probably wouldn't. And there's your answer. If you think about it, would you like to play through that as the kind of the player, and it doesn't sound good, then maybe just see what happens instead. And I think if you can let go of your ideas, it becomes easier to let go of some of those railroading tendencies because you're not trying to force a particular vision that you have in your head.
Yeah, I think that's good advice for GMs in general. I also think that we're probably about time to move on to the last topic.
All right. Well, it's kind of funny because I guess it's my turn, and my topics are
Uh-huh.
sort of an amalgamation of the things we've been talking about. So I had sort of,
Better
I
come
guess
up
we
with
can go
something
back
else
to,
quickly.
dun, dun, dun. So I guess I'll go back to balancing. So we talked about balancing as far as player powers, but I guess one of the things that's been interesting, particularly as I read through stuff about fifth edition. So I come from my first games was basically basic expert and first edition way back in the day. And at least I was a kid, but even growing up, I guess up until maybe third edition, the concept of the way things are balanced didn't really, I don't know, it wasn't something that was so known that it would be talked about. Like I don't remember GMs, I don't remember if I was running stuff that I really thought about balance. I don't remember players thinking about balance. But in fifth edition, it's become a really big thing about balancing, how each class is balanced against each other, how you see people, was this encounter unfair because it wasn't balanced correctly? So there's become, at least, and other people could talk about if it's been something discussed I just wasn't aware of with a lot of previous editions, but I feel like the awareness of balance and where it is and what should be balanced and how they should be balanced. So I guess that would be my topics. What do you guys think about balancing in its various forms, whether it's, like in fifth edition, where each class has to be balanced against every other class, usually with combat as the metric at every level, versus players being meta aware of on a certain level, or at least have ideas of how encounters should be balanced, whether something is too hard or, it's set up in a way that's unfair, or, just different kind of balancing aspects of the game.
So I have some thoughts about this, unsurprising. I think that, interestingly, I think that the reason that this has happened much more in 5th edition is the way in which people discuss the games and the way in which people get together to discuss the games. So 4th edition, I agree, I didn't see anywhere near as much conversation about balance. People complained that things were unbalanced, but it wasn't like, oh, this, it was more like warlocks, yeah, they're kind of hacky and unbalanced. That's really unfair on everyone else. We're just not playing warlocks. Okay, then, cool. Sorry, that might have been 3.5. But it was less a case of, oh, I believe, oh, burn on 4E there. I think it's become more and more a thing because of a few reasons. First of all, there's a lot of other games out there that kind of have a lot of attention given to the balance. Sort of a lot of the smaller, more indie games, and I think that's caused people to think about it. I also think places like Reddit and where people come together to discuss these things are things that make people, one person might go, oh, my gut says this isn't right. And then another person comes along and says, hey, guys, this doesn't feel right. And then you kind of get this sort of cumulative, oh, yeah, this isn't right. This isn't balanced. I think, does that make any sense to people? Did other people experience that?
Yeah, I mean, I think right. You have a larger community now, so I
A
think
more
that's
connected community, maybe.
yeah. I think that's a big part of it. I think another factor that is probably coming into play here is that 4E didn't work as well for Wizards as they were hoping. 5E came along at just about the right time, and it's a more polished game. It's a little bit more forgiving than 3 and earlier editions, and it was really primed and set at a younger generation of players, and they've done a really great job at marketing that. Many of those players, I suspect their experience with the term role-playing games actually comes from video games.
Yeah.
And in an online video game, the contribution that your character has uh, the correlation, at least in MMOs, even today, um, is not how creative you are, how funny you are, how well you interact with the shopkeeper. It's how effective is my character class.
Yeah, how have I balanced it for combat? How have I? Yeah,
Yes. And and that's a very important factor in those games, because those games cannot offer the immersion right now that a tabletop RPG can, because the reasons that we discussed. A DM or GM can take something, run with it. If the player characters say, man, I'm gonna make a helmet out of this bowl or something, just off the wall. Yes, sure, okay. But in an MMO, that would be, well, there's no mechanic for it because it hasn't been programmed, and who would do that? So we're not going to waste resources on doing that. Um, so yeah, basically, you have this need to have very in-depth character balance, and yeah, that's awesome in the chat there. Uh, and I think that for a lot of people, they're coming back into RPGs and they're seeing that, and so they focus on that. They focus on that quite heavily. And on the one hand, I appreciate it, but on the other hand, I think it's also a little bit of a detraction from what tabletop RPGs are good at.
I think that balance really came about too a lot in third edition as well, because don't forget, second edition, the community was smaller, and that there was a lot less people involved and a lot less connected, as was mentioned earlier. But something that may not be a coincidence is, don't forget that WotC also owned Magic the Gathering, and Magic the Gathering was very, very focused on balance, and that not characters, cards should be balanced. Cards had to be modified or had to be restricted because they were too powerful, and in comparison to other cards. So I think while that may not have been a conscious decision, on some levels it was probably a subconscious decision that, hey, this is the game that we marketed to allow us to buy Dungeons and Dragons. Um, let's apply some of the same mindset to that as well, and keeping things balanced, as opposed to second edition, which could be very, very unbalanced. Some character classes were obviously way more powerful than others, and I think that might have been part of why it's had more emphasis in the last 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, I guess the big thing for me that I find interesting is the fact that it's so player. There's a lot of player awareness about balance, particularly when I see things online about encounter balance, and I've wondered whether it's because there's such um, a more focused approach on sort of narrative type gaming. I played in someone's game, and it was a fun game, but it was, we just marched from encounter to encounter to encounter,
Mm.
and we had no control over the who we were fighting, where we were fighting, the circumstances of it. And this was a 3.x game. And I remember getting frustrated as a player, but obviously someone who also GMs, with the kind of balancing fact, because they were all just edge of your teeth, like death encounters. And I kind of felt like, man, it would be nice to get something a little, like, easier, or just something less harrowing, but we had no choices involved. So we didn't have, I always think of it in the old school sense that, hey, look, if you find that this fight is too hard, then then run away, retreat, go back, lick your wounds, figure another approach and do it. But in the kind of game that I was playing, we didn't have that option. There was no, let's get out of there. It's like we were kind of, it's like we're entering an arena, the doors closed behind us since we had to fight. So we had no opportunities to really set our own, um, style, or set our own pace, so to speak, of doing it. So I know I thought about it at that point, but it's just fascinating to me that players are so keenly aware of balancing, or have such ideas of meta balancing. Whereas my first instinct is like, why are you worrying about the balance? If it's hard, then step back, retreat, go get some hirelings, go to town, leave the main entrance, see if you could sneak in another way, like use all the player options you have to figure out other things. But I feel like,
I
for
think
whatever
that's
reason,
linked to
players don't feel like they have those options, that they're stuck with what the GM has put in front of them.
Yeah, I think that links back to what was being said earlier about how MMOs are, a big part of people's kind of experience of RPGs. Because yeah, I have found that a lot of games that I've played more recently are combat focused, right? And yeah, as you say, I would always encourage my players to run away. Right? You leave that option there. Oh, I don't want to fight. I want to. We walked in the front door Matrix style, and we found that probably the guards are a bit too much for us to handle. Okay, fine. We'll run away and we'll sneak in through the sewers. Right?
Yeah, I mean that should be options. I think either.
Right.
I think it's a combination. I think sometimes, and this has come up too, where GMs are frustrated that their players don't take the option and run away when they have it there, right? So I think there's something where some GMs don't maybe highlight the option enough at either session 0 or just through they're doing to keep hammering into their players like you have other options. You don't just have to bang in through the front door and rush in and then take whatever it has. And then I think there is something with, and I'm not going to say why it is. I don't know if it's video game logic or whatever, that parties now are just less likely to run from encounters. I mean, it's a pretty known thing. I've said it a lot. If you're a GM and you're planning encounter and you feel like you want your encounter, the players to run away, don't count on them running away because they're probably just going to walk into that TPK and go down swinging. And I don't know why that is. I think it's more prevalent with today's today's kind of mainstream players as it was in the past. But I couldn't say why that's happened. But I do think it is a thing.
I always felt that was kind of difficult because I think that a lot of the early old school games were written under the pretense that you didn't run away, that this was meant for you to actually have a chance of winning it. And I think that's one of the things that inhibits players from running away.
Sure, I also think that, as I said a second ago, I played World of Warcraft for a lot of years, and once you're in the room, running away just isn't an option. You die. You win or you die, right? And I do think that a lot of the younger players who are coming into role-playing games have that experience. Have that feeling. I feel like I might be the baby in the room, to be honest. Relative to you guys, because I wasn't alive when the various when the earliest edition of D&D came out. I wasn't alive, I'm afraid.
Yeah. I don't know what I mean. I could say that like I can't. It's hard for me to. I can't. I was not that old when it first came out, so I can't peel back the nostalgia and mixed up memories and everything to figure out what was what. But I could say that when I played someone else's game who took a lot of kind of a set of modern players, but put them through. I think it was Labyrinth Lord that he chose. Might have been Sword and Sorcery, one of the two, kind of OSR, retro clones. And I could tell you this: we were playing through, and we hit one encounter that we beat. We got into it, which was fairly an easier sort of encounter. The next encounter was tough, and I was the only player character to survive. And I remember when the encounter started, it was started in the clearing, and there was some kind of cabin. I think we just left. We'd gone in to check out the cabin. We came out, and enemies that sort of were coming out of the other side of the clearing for us. And I remember I kept trying to convince the other players, defensive positioning. All right, let's get inside. Let's hold the doors. Let's make them march up to the windows, and then we can have maybe a couple of turns of just having almost full cover and firing at them. And you know what happened? The fighter just ran out into the field, and I was like, okay, but I wasn't gonna, alpha game this. I was like, all right, he ran in the field. I was playing a thief, so I took cover. The next thing is he tries to get to the very bad guy, to the captain of the bad guys, tries to run past 3 other guys, just gets totally knocked out. Next thing, the cleric then runs after him to try to save him, doesn't listen. I'm like, that guy's dead. He's toast. He ran out there, tried to save him. Him goes down. The wizard then went down because he tried to kind of stand up tall and send out some magic missiles. And I was the only one that was left. So I happened to survive and get back to town, and they all introduced new characters. And you know what? The next combat they played, there was a lot more of let's stick to cover. Let's play defensively. Let's not try to expose ourselves. They picked up quickly on the lessons of just getting our butts kicked, which was we don't have to engage things on their terms just because they're pushed out there. And I don't know if it's just that ethos, because I see a lot of stuff now like, oh, you should take it easy on new parties, or you should, don't, fudge things and let them live. And that is my kind of direct experience of, maybe that ends up creating characters that players that don't get that taste of defeat, so that they don't know that they should, they shouldn't kind of just rush out because they tend to, by hook or by crook or by fudge or whatever, that they win. and so it develops that sense of looking at things differently. But
I mean, I had a very similar experience to what you're describing. The last big convention game I ran. I run a multi-table game at a convention here in the UK, and this guy he had been playing with another of the GMs for 2 of the sessions. This was the 3rd session. This guy throws a grenade, and this guy just runs up and jumps on the grenade, jumps past it, like, yeah, who even cares, right? It's a grenade. Boom. Yeah, dude, you're down. He's like, what? I'm a tank. I'm like, yes, but you literally ran up to a grenade. What do you expect? You know, armor can save you from some things. This was obviously a sci-fi game. Armor can save you from some things, but, you know, if you literally run up to a grenade, stand and look at it, bad things are likely to happen. You don't seem to have developed your sense of danger properly, you know?
yeah, totally. And I think that's the other thing that kind of drives me nuts a little bit is the MMO lingo that's worked its way in, where people thinking of like, I'm a tank, I'm a this. It's like there's no real tanks in the game. Like, yes, there's a couple abilities that will impose disadvantage if they don't attack you, but guess what? There's no magnetism. I actually had at one point on Twitter talking to someone, and I was trying to explain about, you know, and again, it was funny that there was a lot of people that didn't seem to get what I was saying about controlling the battlefield, of having your party try to, you know, contain an enemy or not just let them run around. And I said at one point, the guy was like, well, what if I make a space? We put a space between my 2 fighters, and that way anyone runs through gets attacks of opportunity, you know, or something to that effect, or that why would they go around the fighter? And I was like, well, you have your magic user maybe sitting in the back row. Like, don't you think that enemies might want to get there? And he couldn't understand, like, why they just wouldn't attack the fighter. And I'm like, well, the fighter doesn't have some magnetic quality that all enemies are going to attack them. And like, why wouldn't you take out the wizard that's doing almost as much damage and looks like they're wearing a bathrobe, as opposed to the guy who's encased in stainless steel? It's like, get rid of that guy and then focus on the fighter. But it was like, he couldn't comprehend it. Literally, it was like, why wouldn't they attack the fighter? And I wanted to turn and say, well, why would they attack the fighter? Like, even animals, when you watch the Nature Channel, they don't go after the strongest in the herd. They go after the weakest one. Why aren't they? If they can get around that fighter and get to the soft, squishy guys in the back, they should do it, unless you force them not to.
I'm particularly guilty of that in superhero games, right? You come up, your team of superheroes are facing a team of supervillains. Yeah, 4 of the supervillains team up on the one weakest superhero. Obviously, right? They decide which one's the weakest and go for them. Even out the numbers.
Absolutely. Or, you know, at least like, and this is why I talked about earlier when I mentioned the chat about, you know, add more guys to the combat, because the more guys you add, even if they're minions, and I really loved minions from 4th edition, and I don't know why they didn't make it into 5th edition. It seems like a no-brainer. They should have been in the core rules, but they're not. But it just forces your party to make choices in the combat, and it gives those guys in the back something else to fear. Because, you know, I think a lot of times people go, well, all I'm just gonna do is sit back there and cantrip blast for however many rounds combat lasts. It's a lot more interesting if you have to think about, I can sit here and cantrip blast, or I got to run and find cover because I've got these goblins or kobolds bearing down on me. Like, that to me is more fun and interesting than, well, I know they're just going to focus on my quote unquote tank because they're a quote unquote tank. So I'll just sit here 10 paces back, you know, pointing my finger and blasting at them.
Sorry, I was just giggling at what Ripple said. Man in a dressing gown showing up to a combat. I think we're low on time at this point, unless I'm much mistaken.
All right. Well, I guess we'll go into the plugging and then general open questions. So if you guys want to go through and plug what you got, and, you know, throw the links in the chat, and then we can go on to the general open questions part of the chat.
Who's going first?
We can go in reverse order. I'll still go last. I'll defer, but you guys go.
I think that's Das.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm Brian from Lost Relic Industries, and my wife is the other half. Liz is the other half of Lost Relic Industries. We make Swords and Shaman of Songard, and I'm posting some links in the chat there. And Swords and Shaman of Songard is a tabletop role-playing game set in the world of Songard, which is a savage, sort of prehistoric Pleistocene world with Stone Age elves and Bronze and Iron Age human civilizations trying to eke out living as best they can against the backdrop of post-apocalyptic type setting. If you like Hyboria and you like Conan and you like ElfQuest, give us check us out.
I think I'm next. So I'm Tom Canals from Frog God Games. Currently, I'm working on what is going to be called Tecoxo. It is going to be a Mesoamerican expansion to the Lost Lands campaign setting. So I think I have a little art I can show you guys so you can get an idea what we're looking at and see if I do this right
Or possibly you drop out of the channel. No, that was someone else. Sorry.
There you go. So I actually could do it. So that's some of the art from the book that will be coming out, and hopefully we'll be kickstarting this. I'm going to say first to second quarter of 2020. So about half the writing is done, another half to go, and then I have to go through all of it and make sure it all makes sense, and then run with it from there. And the cover, I'm not going to share the cover. The cover is freaking amazing.
Awesome. Was there anyone else, or is it just me?
I think that's me.
All right.
Assuming I get to go.
Absolutely.
I am Ed Jowett from Shades of Vengeance. We do more stuff than I really can keep in my brain at any one time. But the main stuff is we create role-playing games. We also create comics and audio dramas based in the same universes in order to expand them. I'm just putting together a couple of links at the minute. Right at this moment, we've got a game on Kickstarter. It is called Era Forbidden, and it is absolutely my favorite game that I've created in a little while, actually. There you go. Let me hit that, see if that works. So that's on Kickstarter right now. They all run on the same Era D10 rule set, which I created 5 years ago. Well, published first 5 years ago. Yeah, that broadly is it. And I'm going to stall for a minute while my image finishes uploading. I've also got I've got quite a few things underway. So I'm about to release a comic anthology shortly. That'll be in about 2 weeks. I'm also working on a miniatures skirmish game for some miniatures that I released earlier in the year. I am working on I am working on a Final Fantasy inspired RPG that will run on the Era D10 rule set with my own little world in there as well. And that's it.
Nice. That art looks really cool. All right. Well, I'm Todd. I talk about and I work on game stuff. I don't have any links. I'm working on some content, but it's not ready to share yet. I will drop a link to my YouTube channel where I try to put stuff on the regular schedule, though I'm about a week late on some stuff. So anybody who's already subscribed to the channel, I apologize for that. All right. So I guess if anybody here has any questions, just throw them in the chat. We can answer it. Or if anybody speaking has anything they want to throw out there, we can just kind of be more off the cuff at this point. Let it rip.
Thank you for listening to us ramble on for what seems like forever. That's what I'm going to throw out there.
Yeah, it's all good. I know. I've been wondering whether, and I'll have to get feedback whether people like the kind of. I feel like these topics actually came together in sort of a pretty well wrapped way, or sometimes it seems like the topics are kind of all over the board, and I'm wondering whether to sort of maybe be more thematic. With let's hold it.
I kind of like it a bit more over the place.
Do you?
I kind of like it a bit more all over the place because it means that you're not coming back and saying the same thing multiple times.
Very true.
That's the only thing, and it obviously lets you cover a lot more ground. As a designer, how do you take people who house rule game liberally? I'm absolutely fine with it. If that's the way you want to play the game, as long as you understood what it is that was originally intended. If that doesn't work for your group, make what works for your group, right? That's your job as the GM. What we write, I'm speaking for myself primarily and using the royal we. What we write is guidelines. at the end of the day. And if you don't like a rule, think about the impact of that. But sure, disregard it.
Yeah, I think you can't stop it anyway. So people are going to do what they're going to do. I think the only thing you hope is that doesn't inform their impressions of your game. If they house rule something heavily and then it flops, that they don't look at it as a failure of your game because their house ruled version flopped.
Yeah, but all you can really do is hope for that. The only time I've ever got a little bit harsh on house ruling is actually when I have guys run games at conventions representing Shades of Vengeance. And sometimes they take a few liberties that I'm not entirely happy with. Because, that is the representation of the game. That is the official representation of the game. And if you throw the rulebook out the window and just do whatever and it doesn't work, that leaves people with a misunderstanding. That's pretty much what I think he was talking about.
Yeah, basically, right. If you're in a convention type situation or anything where you're going to put out you're going to give people, you want people to play your game and they're playing something else, and that person running it, that else things that they entered, make the game fall. Yeah, you don't want it to be, you don't want people to link it with your original thing. You want people to know kind of what the original game is. But yeah, I think ultimately for house games and stuff, you got to let people, people are going to do it anyway. So you can't stop them. You just got to embrace it. And sometimes people come up with great things that are good additions out of house ruling.
I encourage people to get in touch with me and say, hey, I came up with this thing. What do you think? And I'll go, I'm not sure that's going to work because XYZ. Or, wow, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. Have you thought about the impact on this, though?
Right.
Usually I've thought these things through.
Yeah, absolutely. But Rangers and I think Bards, they were all at first in the game. They were third party. I think in strategic review, they were written by third party people. They were essentially house rule creations that became core classes. So, it's all good.
Yeah, and in our book, in chapter 1, Rules for Game Masters, I open it up with the first rule is to have fun, and the second rule is that all other rules are optional. So yeah, I'm a big fan of make it work for your table, and because if you're creating a fun experience, then I certainly don't want to take away from that. I think you're doing it right. It was interesting what you said, Ed, about the it being representative of the game at a convention, and that was something that I'll be honest, I hadn't considered. Somebody else running the game at a convention and how do they represent it? But really, I don't have a lot of control over that, right? That's and I don't know that I want to have control over that, but I can see where that would be a little bit weird if somebody misrepresented it.
Yeah, just to clarify, that was actually a member of my team who was, he was there with me running my game.
Okay.
And I had to go, hey, you realize that if you do that, the rules don't actually work, and this pop gun is more powerful than this Magnum.
Yeah. So if I'm representing Lost Relic at a convention, I'm going to run the game rules the way that they were meant to be run. And that way also too, that gives players an opportunity to give me feedback and say, oh, well, this didn't work. Or have you considered this? And, that is actually very helpful. I do have optional rules, just built into the game that says, if these rules don't work, here's some things that you might want to add to incorporate for different types of styles of play. So we literally kind of baked our own, like in the Game Master's book, here's some optional house rules if you want them, just some ideas, because it changes the way the game is played. And some people like different initiative systems, for instance.
Sure.
Yeah, that's nice. I think, and the alternative is that you end up having to pre-bake in minute rules for everything, which becomes just a total slog. So you ultimately have to, you hopefully you can put the tools in place that when people are home house ruling, that they can use kind of the core mechanics or that you've laid out for them, but just doing it in ways that fit the kind of situations they want, because you can't write down rules for everything. And that the games that tried, I feel like the first edition DMG, a lot of that stuff should have been like, hey, optional. And maybe they did put it as optional. I don't know anyone. I've heard a couple people say that they played with all those different rules, but it seems insane to me. But maybe not in play, but it's something where you want to go, yeah, these are optional, include them if you want to, but please don't feel compelled to put all these different minute rules for every tiny situation in your game.
Well, rulifying everything gets just burdensome. I mean, just as an example, I had a maybe not as an example of rulifying, but an example of why you don't want to do that. I had a player character who had he basically managed to kill a sea turtle. We were hungry, and they were hungry, and they needed a sea turtle. Um, and at a certain point, he's looking at it, and he has very little equipment. He can use a shield, and he says, "Well, I'd like to make a shield out of the turtle shell." There's not a solid, fast rule for that, right? But you find a way to improv it and say, "Well, okay, what kind of knowledge do you have of these things? Okay, you understand how shields work, but you don't maybe have a lot of skill with animal skinning. Let's see. Let's make a roll for something. What kind of things would you like to lash it?" And so so he found items and then made the case for it and said, "I'd like to do this." And so we rolled for it.
Yeah, I
But
mean that's kind of a big part of the GM's role within this, and the game designer is supposed to provide the opportunity for the GM to do these things and to know what works and what doesn't within the framework of the rules that exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that like Basic Expert's one of my favorite written rule books, and one of the things that they talk about in their GM section, I think it might even be in the beginning of the book, but it might be in the GM section, is just the different role mechanics there are and how you can use the one that fits your situation, whether it's kind of rolling against an attribute, whether it's rolling something X and 6, or whether it's rolling a percentage dice to try to cover all those edge cases. So they're giving you that kind of tool. Is like, we don't know what you're going to be rolling for, but if these other things don't work, just you say you need, we have a 9% chance of doing something, then just roll 9% chance. And something like that's great because it gives you the tools to using the mechanics of the rules to kind of fill out any situation you'll need without trying to define every situation that you might need to roll.
Yeah. In the same way, in the Era D10 rule set, we have a luck stat. So yeah, you might be slightly more likely to hit those edge cases than other people if you sacrifice other things to be able to do that. But yeah, you go, okay, fine. I really have no idea what that is. Let's roll luck.
Yeah, that's cool. I really like kind of luck systems or ways you can sort of just. There used to be in a totally homebrew game I used to play, and there was basically, we called it a called shot, but you could kind of use it for anything. But you had to roll 100 on 100. If you rolled it, whatever you pretty much wanted to happen would happen, and otherwise something bad would happen. So it had that kind of limit of you didn't want to do it a lot because obviously chances are you aren't going to make the roll, and so chances are something bad's going to happen. But if you were desperate and you wanted to just try to call your shot and do it, then you could do it. And there were a couple times where it paid off in big ways and made for really kind of fun time without being overpowering.
Yeah, I mean, I was very inspired by Traveller and the Jack of all trades skill. Okay, you're not great at this, but you have a chance. You have a non-zero chance of pretty much whatever it is you want.
Yeah, that's something I like. Is just give people a non-zero chance, even just one. You got to roll on 100.
People will take a long shot, right?
Well,
they will.
I have to quantify that for my settings and my games. I typically run games where it has to be realistic. Like you can have a critical success, but that means it's the best possible outcome. If you want to beat the Olympic world record for like long jump by 20 feet and you're a human, it's probably not going to happen magically unassisted.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always in terms of what your setting and things dictate. I'm not suggesting that in, say, a game where you're playing Caveman, you roll 1d100 to see if you invent a nuclear bomb. It's all when you discuss beforehand kind of what the bounds are that you can do. But within that, once you kind of got those bounds, then I think it's good to give people a chance, even if it's a low, even if it's a very low chance, okay, that usually you can only jump 10 feet, but you need to get across this chasm, which is 15 feet.
have a
maybe you
go,
can
see if you can.
have a go. It may be a really low chance. Maybe it's just 1%, but maybe that 1% means that your adrenaline and whatever kicked up, and you just got the perfect takeoff and wind assisted and whatever it is. And you got the extra few feet,
and the mage who was hiding the other side of the hill gave you a levitation spell.
Sure, or you just you don't land with your feet, but you hit enough of the ledge on the other side that you're able to scrabble up by your fingernails. Whatever it is. But obviously, yeah, of course, there should, at some point you say, well, it's a 50-foot chasm, and they're like, can I roll to jump across? You just go, yeah, no, that's not happening. I think there was some quote I saw from Gygax that someone posted a while back, which is kind of this order of importance of sort of what to preserve. And I think the quote had, setting at the top. And what I took that to mean is kind of that thing. Like, you have a tone, you have a setting of your campaign, and that's kind of the first thing that you preserve. Like, does it fit the tone of your campaign? Does it fit your setting? And
the world,
it's kind of like the world. And if it fits,
are you breaking the laws of physics? Would be the way I'd put that.
Right. Whatever it is, like, is it breaking your world in a way that you don't want? And if it is, then then don't do that. But if it doesn't break those rules, to the next, go down the line of the next thing. But yeah. I think we've kind of done that question. Anyone have any other questions, or I don't mean to cut anybody off. Anyone else has any other opinions on the question in front of us?
Sounds like a no. I actually have to head out now anyway.
Okay.
So I'm going to say thanks very much to everyone for listening. And yeah, thanks Ripples for all of the comments and questions, because that gave me a few giggles as we were going.
Absolutely. Well, have a great, I guess you're in the afternoon, evening at this point, right? So have a great
afternoon, evening. That's right.
Yep.
Thanks very much, everyone.
So long. Good chatting.
Thanks, Ed.
So does anyone else have anything? I mean, if not, well, I'm happy to cut it early if we're all finished. So last call for alcohol, questions, comments, etc.
Looks like we might have another question incoming.
Awesome. As designers, when you design a combat system, what is your goal with it? Who wants to take a first stab at that one?
Well, I personally don't design any combat systems. I use 5e or other people's combat systems. So I guess the goal of combat, though, should always be to make it fun and interesting and challenging, and not limiting. You don't want it to just be the same monotonous routine. I roll a d20, I swing. I roll a d20, I swing. I swing. I swing. You want it to be allow characters to do more than just that, just swinging, and that can be used through skills. Make them, I want to do the thing where I jump over one guy and on the way bound I swing. Okay, well, here's a check you can make. If you succeed on that, I'll give you a chance of doing it.
Yeah, I like the whole combat as war, sort of as obstacle kind of thing. So I think when I look at what I want to do with combat, and when I think about it, is I don't want combat to be the end or the end result of what I'm trying to aim for. I want it to be that thing you're doing to get to something else. And excuse me, I had to cough there for a second. I want it to be, so it ends up being that choice that you take or something that you can try not to do. So, and I think that kind of enters into other questions you get, like, in 5th edition, whether you like it or not, all the classes are kind of balanced around combat. So I think kind of things come out of whack a little bit if they're avoiding lots of combat, because there are certain classes that are built solely around, combat. And I guess this was true back in the day too, because fighters just had fighting and kind of nothing else. But I don't know, it didn't feel so. There were so few abilities. It didn't feel like they were missing out, because unless you were a wizard, or a thief, you really didn't have much that everyone was kind of on equal footing in that sense. But so when I look at combat, I want to look at, it's war, it's hard, it's difficult, something that I want to avoid. If you can, try to get the jump on it and end it as fast as possible if you can.
So I have a couple of things to add, and I apologize. I have a puppy and an older dog just going nuts behind me. So if you hear them, sorry about that. So for me, designing a combat system, I think first and foremost, I would look at what is the feel that I'm trying to present in the game. If this was a game that was based on, let's say, martial arts or something like that, let's say I'm making a game based on a setting similar to Enter the Badlands or something. I would suspect that to capture that feel, I would want to create a very cinematic combat. Um, so I think at that point, the rolling the dice and hitting something doesn't cut it. Um, so for a game like that, like I said, I would start to look at, well, are there different types of moves or things that I can incorporate into the mechanics, but do it in such a way that it's easy so that people aren't page flipping. So that's and that leads into another thing. Um, in most systems, I believe that the combat mechanic, and I kind of agree with you here on this too, that Todd, the combat mechanic, you should be able to move through it quickly, um, because I've seen too many games where people sit down and you spend several minutes going around the table determining initiative and then trying to determine what people are going to do. And the funny thing about that is that if you think about it, personal combat takes place in a matter of seconds most of the time. Um, and yet you can spend an hour in some games trying to figure out what happens in those, 3 or 4 seconds. And I feel like you lose a lot of immersion doing that. And so for a role playing game, I think it's very important that the combat system be very streamlined, it be very easy, and that you not have to page flip.
Yeah, it's totally very gonna be very settings dependent. I haven't I know there are some martial arts type games. I haven't really played any to see which ones handle combat in a way that makes it fun. It keeps it cinematic, it keeps the kind of flow that you think about in a kung fu movie when two kind of masters face off. Interesting. I would not. Yeah, I would be. I haven't really had too much experience playing with monks and 5e to see if they do a decent job of that. But yeah, I mean, it just I think like the at least in kind of a D&D type systems, particularly like 5e, I would say that like 2 or 3 rounds is all right, and after that it just starts to get into a slog, so that what you can
Yep.
if you can avoid that by hook or by crook. I mean, I like to go to the old school tools like reactions and morale to try to help that help cut down on that drudgery of you kind of can see that the fight's already decided, but your combatants just don't know yet. It's like make them understand, to do things. I think if I was going to redesign fifth edition combat or what I would kind of add, I would try to put more an emphasis maybe on just on all the numbers to balance it around what I think that sweet spot of how much of it is fun before it becomes what I guess I'd like to think of as when you've exhausted all the interesting decisions, it should be over. You have X amount of interesting things you have to decide about. It could be positioning as far as movement, it could be what abilities to use. And then at some point, I remember this in the fourth edition, clearly you would sort of run out of stuff until you were just doing your basic attack over and over again, at least in some of the longer comments or combats that my game played in. You run out of steam, and then it's just okay. Here's my basic attack, basic attack, basic attack. So I think if I was looking at the combat, I would want to try to test it and, like you said, streamline it to the point of okay, I think there's 3 or 4 rounds of interesting decisions. I want to try to tune the combat to end after that third or fourth round. Because yeah, like Ripples is saying, everything takes a long time, or we were all saying, initiative, everything else, all those mechanics take up so much time that even if it is only a few seconds of game time, it takes forever.
Yeah, it's tricky, and some of this is so like I said, when I'm doing the mechanics, I'm going for fairly light mechanics. I don't want people to get stuck. But yeah, to I think what Ripples is saying about creating immersion and the reward for engaging in mechanics, that can be tricky when you read that on the page and you say, oh well, we just go over here and we roll and we hit and we do damage and then it's the next person's turn. Um, you don't want to get bogged down in that. You don't want to get bogged down in people basically doing something uneventful. You want outcomes of things to be interesting. So if they linger for a long time and nothing interesting at all has happened in the combat, I think at a certain point, either you can try to bake mechanics to make it go faster, or you can bake things in, like I said, with the idea of a cinematic thing where you have certain sets of moves or counterattacks to make it interesting. But the GM's going to have to probably step in too. I mean, like you said, if the outcome is already determined, why why are we doing this whole motion? Do we cut to the chase at that point? Does an enemy surrender? you know because oftentimes the people you're fighting, they might be robots, but they're not always, right? And if they are robots, does it make sense, when they're clearly defeated, for you to just keep rolling each turn? um
Yeah,
you know
exactly. I think the other thing is, I think sometimes that I know I've seen this from kind of a player thought perspective, even from GMs too, and I think sometimes from a design perspective as well, that you get the interesting decisions all have to come from player abilities. Like people will say, like, "Oh, fighters are boring; they don't have anything to do but just hit." And the thing is that the interesting thing for fighters is what they're doing with these basic moves. Like again, talk about before about are they are they protecting the rest of the party? Are they putting themselves in spots where they are stopping the enemy from doing things? Are they, blocking and are they blocking entrances or exits so that either the enemy can't escape or that they can't get to the casters in the back? Like those are all interesting decisions that have nothing to do with them having tons and tons of abilities, but they've got those choices to make. So it doesn't have to be about, oh, I have to have 800 million abilities in my pocket that I can choose from to use. It's kind of like whatever tools that you have to use, are there interesting things you can do with them? But I think sometimes it often gets confused. At least as far as players thinking like, well, if a fighter can only kind of attack, defend, or dodge, like that's three things, like that's boring. But it's how can you deploy those three things to make those interesting decisions? So it's kind of, I think there's a lot of really good space with combat, particularly in things like fifth edition and kind of how it relates everything together, that don't get talked about a whole lot. But yeah, it's definitely a I think there's a lot of room there for people to really think about kind of doing combat in different ways and what that does. I haven't played Pathfinder 2 to see how, if they do combat any differently than fifth edition. I've kind of been curious since Paizo's had this chance to kind of look at Pathfinder 1 and look at fifth edition and kind of decide how they want to pivot things, but I haven't actually seen enough of it to know if they do anything radically different with combat. I'm assuming not, but I haven't seen. I am curious about it. All
I think
right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, no, that's fine.
I was just gonna say, I think we answered that one. Do we got any back to last call? Anything else? Oh yeah, just as far as on players go, totally. There is a thing where the GMs and players should work together on the making those kind of back and forths seem compelling. Because yeah, the I roll, I hit, you roll, you hit. Yeah, it's on both sides. As a player, totally describe what you're doing. Obviously, I think there can be some, you have to work with your GM and kind of know what's going on, because sometimes I think players will try to get extra liberties from their descriptions. And of course, the opposite is GMs maybe not making the players feel like they're making any progress at all. Um, yeah, one other thing from fourth edition again that they didn't bring over was the whole bloodied concept, which I liked, because it's kind of that point where you get to see that you're doing damage and it kind of just forced GMs, even if they weren't someone who was descriptive, that you would get that kind of descriptive would come out, okay, you've bloodied them. And it just kind of would always, I felt like it had kind of a really kind of cool sound to it and an image, and it kind of gave you some actual actionable information about where the encounter was at if you bloodied things. But yeah, as Ripples was saying, that yes, again, like as the combat rounds go on, yeah, you're going to get less and less creative, which is another reason that if it's at all possible, or knowing your combat system, to kind of limit it to when you're in that kind of interesting mode and not into this like, oh, I just don't care anymore, I just want to kill it, so just I hit, I don't care where I hit, I just hit. Then yeah, that's definitely a good thing. All right. So, anything else? Anybody? I'll look to see if anyone's got any other things to type in the chat. Otherwise, I will call this one a day.
Hey, thanks for having us, Todd.
Yep, thanks. Much appreciated.
Oh, no problem. Thanks everybody for coming. I had kind of a false start last week, so I'm glad I got this one off the ground this week. Hopefully I'll get back in the swing of things and things will be maybe a little bit smoother. But yeah, thanks for coming. I appreciate everybody coming in and hanging out through the chat, and it will get up in the usual channels for download and offline consumption in a couple days. But I'll wrap it up here. Thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your Sunday, and we'll talk to you all later.
You too. Take care, everyone.